Many stories about how someone attained perfection by chanting one chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The Gita Mahatmya and the Padma Purana. There's a story for each of the 18 chapters about somebody who attained perfection by chanting that chapter every day. And they're really amazing stories. People were like seriously disqualified and very simple, completely purified, becoming in touch with chapters of Bhagavad Gita. Beginning of Lord Vishnu describes how his body is the different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, different parts of his body. In other words, he's mind of Bhagavad Gita, and once he's connected with Bhagavad Gita, these are the attainments of perfection. So, is there any particular format?
Just the 13th chapter, maybe just read out 1 to 10,
Okay.
and then make comments.
And you may remember that there's 5 verses together, 8 through 12, so 10 is right in the middle of those. So were you thinking about that?
No, it wasn't.
I mean, we can. So, I mean, we can.
We did this once with Dino.
We can find out where they leave off.
13.
Yeah.
Oh, we went back.
I went back and did a summary last
We
week.
have to start 13, right?
Okay, Dino did 13.
Maybe we can do to 7, 13, 1 to 7.
Yeah, we can see how it goes. If we have extra
Because
time.
I think you finished.
Yeah.
You finished.
You can read it.
All the verses then, and then talk about it.
Yeah,
Cool.
you can read them because it's easier because the microphone's with you as
Oh
well.
yeah, for sure. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So, we're reading in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is called The Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And Arjuna is speaking, and he asks Krishna 6 questions right off the bat. So, we'll read these 6 questions. Arjuna Vacha. Do we chant the Sanskrit at all or no?
No.
Okay. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, the field and the knower of the field, and of knowledge and the object of knowledge." Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field." O Skaina Bharata, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies. And understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Text 4. Now please hear my brief description of the field of activity and how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, and who that knower of the field of activities is, and what his influences are. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in the Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. 5 great elements: false ego, the intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. So, I'll go back through and say some things about them. So this is, first of all, Prabhupada described that the Gita is in 3 pieces. There's 18 chapters, and the first 6 deal with karma yoga, the yoga of action, and the next 6 deal with bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, and the last 6, which begin with chapter 13, deal with jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge. And so we're hearing this basic knowledge about the soul and God and their relationship, which is called sambandha jnana, and which supports devotional service. It's interesting. There's a relationship between knowledge and devotional service. There's one verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that says, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janidya Suvaryagam Yam Chavyada Haitukam, that by rendering devotional service to the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So that verse says that by engaging in bhakti, you get knowledge as a side effect. And then there's another verse that goes, Tachadana Munio Gyanavaya Yuktaya Pashatyatnami Chatmanam Bhakti Shrugahitaya, that the seriously inquisitive student and sage renders devotional service in terms of knowledge he's acquired from the Vedanta Suti. So that says actually that you need to have knowledge in order to perform devotional service. So both things are true. You need some knowledge in order to perform devotional service, but by performing devotional service, you get some knowledge from that. And in one sense, the knowledge you need to know to perform devotional service is theoretical knowledge, and the knowledge you get by performing devotional service is realized knowledge. So that's another way you can think of it. So basically, and this really goes back to the whole second chapter is talking about basically the knower, the field, and the field, because Krishna's first point that he's making is that the self is different from the body. And there's all these verses from 12 to 30 of chapter 2, which are describing how the soul is eternal, how it's unchanging, how it's whereas the body is always changing and it's temporary. So the first 2 things that Arjuna asks about are this Prakriti and Purusha, and then the second 2 are the field and the knower of the field, and the third 2 are the object and the object of, so the knowledge and the object of knowledge. So Krishna chooses to talk about the field first, although it's not the first question that's asked, which is interesting. Perhaps
He chooses which
to answer the third thing that Arjuna asks about is the field, and the fourth is the knower of the field. But rather than answering about the first 2, really, he starts talking about the field. Of course, that is related also to Purusha and Prakriti. But so that's a basic fundamental understanding. And if somebody actually understands that they are spirit and they aren't matter, and then they have a spiritual life. They can have a spiritual life. So that's the most important thing in the beginning of spiritual life, is to actually understand that you're spirit. And some people, they begin spiritual life and then they desist at a certain point, which means that they actually forgot that they're a spirit, and that's where the real opportunity for satisfaction comes. This nice Swami friend of mine, he was speaking in New York one time, Jayadvaita Swami, and he was saying everyone is looking for lasting happiness, but if we want to find lasting happiness, we have to look on the platform that lasts, on the spiritual platform. unfortunately, people are looking for lasting happiness on the material platform. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that actually nothing lasts that's material. Basically, there's one verse where it describes the material world as dukalayam ashasvatam, dukalayam, a place of misery, and ashasvatam, a place that's temporary. In the next chapter, 9:33, he describes it as anityam asukam lokam. Anityam, temporary, asukam, not happy, lokam, this world. So he's sometimes people become atheistic because they see the misery in the world and think, how can there be God with all this misery in this world? But when we see the misery in the world, we conclude, well, God's right. He said it was a miserable place, and we look around and that's what we see. So it can increase our faith.
Where that first asukam?
Yeah, it's 9:33. Yeah. Yes, he talks about Kim Punar Brahmana Punyam Bhakta Rajurshayastata Anityamasukam Lokam Imam Prapsya Bajasramam. He's saying that the previous verse talks about how even the Shudras, the Vaishyas, and the women can attain success by taking shelter of him. And the next one says, what to speak of the bhaktas and the saintly kings and the brahmanas. Therefore, having come to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, engaged in my devotional service. And basically attain me. So there he's re-describing it as a place of temporariness and misery. So we're learning here that the body is called the field, and one who knows the body is the knower of the field, or the soul. And then one of the most important verses in the whole chapter is 13:3. This kind of body, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. So we learn that there's not only one soul in the body, but there's actually two souls. There's our individual soul and there's Krishna. Because that's very clear. It says, Kshetrigam chapi mam vidi, know that I'm also a knower, basically. Sarva kshetreshu bharata, and I'm situated in all the kshetras, all the fields, in all the bodies. And then on top of that, he says, to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. So there's so many universities, so many colleges, and they all are they all are claiming to have knowledge. Right? But in Krishna's opinion, they actually don't have knowledge because they don't know that there's a knower. It's non-material. That's different from the material body. They are thinking that the knower is a transformation of the field. In other words, they're thinking consciousness is a product of matter. I went to a consciousness conference in Florida in January. We had some followers of Sadhaputta who had a PhD in mathematics. He was a scientist who wrote books on Krishna consciousness and science, and he would find empirical evidence showing how materialistic explanations of consciousness and life are inadequate, and he would also find empirical evidence showing that Vedic ideas about consciousness had evidence supporting them. So at any rate, there was this consciousness conference, and people were talking about it, and there still are scientists who claim that consciousness is purely a material phenomenon, although they can't actually demonstrate that. Or it's not like you can take different non-conscious things and put them together in such a way that a conscious thing is produced. It's actually blind faith. Because you can't go in the lab and demonstrate it. So it's actually not real science to say that consciousness is a product of matter, because it can't be demonstrated. Anything else, like you can say water is a product of hydrogen and oxygen, and you can go in the lab and mix them together and you can produce it, and therefore it's well substantiated, But they have this knowledge, they have this theory of electromagnetism, and with their electromagnetic knowledge, they can take electricity and they can produce motion, like in a motor, or they can take motion and produce electricity, like in a generator or an alternator. So this theory is very well established. They can actually use it to produce something practical and demonstrate that it's actually working the way they say it works. But this idea, this atheist-like idea that consciousness is a product of matter, is something that they haven't been able to demonstrate. I was actually talking to Ravindra Prabhu yesterday, because he also lives in the place where my Guru Stuyvesant, and he was saying that after they did this conference in Calcutta when Prabhupada was present, called the Life Comes From Life conference, that they were planning to do another conference where they were going to show mathematically how the theory of evolution isn't viable. Because I learned another thing I learned at that consciousness conference. It was interesting that Ravindra Swarup Prabhu had a PhD in religion. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to get his academically qualified followers to together and to show how to rashly present the idea that everything comes from God, rather than everything comes from matter. So Ravindra Swarup Prabhu wrote Srila Prabhupada asking him, how can I help you? And Prabhupada wrote back saying that he could prove that Darwin was mistaken. So that seemed overwhelming to him, and he had all these thoughts of us becoming like the Christian creationists in Texas, which I guess he didn't have a high opinion of. So at any rate, so he was sort of overwhelmed with that. And then soon after that, Sadhaputta came through Philadelphia, where Ravindra Swarup was based for many years, as a book distributor on a traveling party from New Vrindavan. So they tried making him treasurer because he had mathematical abilities, but he wasn't so practical, so he wasn't so suited for the job. So they decided to put him on books because they didn't really know what to do with him. But when he came through Philadelphia, Ravindra Swarup Prabhu found out he had a PhD in mathematics, or else he was working on his PhD. I'm not sure. So he decided to show him the letter from Prabhupada and ask him, can you defeat Darwin? And then Sadhaputta said something to him that stuck with him his whole life. He said that, well, most of the mathematicians, they know that evolution didn't happen, but they don't talk about it because it makes the biologists so upset. So that was like, so he was very happy to hear Sadhaputta say that, because he realized he got the person he needed to defeat Darwin's theory. So they're actually going to have a conference where people in the academic world who had a similar understanding that isn't really viable according to probability in mathematics, they were going to demonstrate that. And the idea was that they were going to show that on a rigorous level to the academics, and then present it to the people in general. But somehow other Bhakti Damodar or Prabhu, then I guess, who was in charge of the operation, didn't really go with it, although they talked about doing it. He just decided to do something else. So it didn't happen, but that was where they were planning to head with that. So it would be interesting. So it still could be done, I guess. Get together favorable mathematicians, show how that it's not really viable, how this idea that matter organized itself and became conscious. So at any rate, and this idea, also this verse is important because there's some people who say that there's only one soul, the Advaitavadis. And this verse says, it's very clear that there's two souls, because the word also is there. I'm also the knower. Sha, meaning and. So there's the knower that he talked about in the previous verse, and then there's him who's another knower. Therefore there's and meanings. There's two knowers. So, whereas the Mayavadis say there's only one knower, and we are that knower, and we're all that one knower, even though we're forgetting that temporarily. Yeah, right. So that had problems. Prabhupada would always point out that because they say that we are God, but that we forgot that we are God, but that doesn't actually make any sense, because that means that there's the power of forgetfulness or illusion is greater than God, if God can forget himself. So it's not actually a viable theory, although there are people who accept it and promote it and advertise it, but that doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And it's not supported by Bhagavad Gita, as this verse says, that there's actually another knower. And then the other verse, which also defeats that Mayavadi idea, is 15:7, which is another chapter which describes how we are eternal fragmental parts. So we can't actually merge into the whole, according to that verse, because we are eternal parts. So, and that's very clear. Angsha is there, and Sanatana is there. We are eternal parts of who? Of Krishna. So in the body, there's two souls. There's Krishna, the Supreme Soul, and there's us, who are a little part of Krishna. So there's the part of Krishna and the whole of Krishna are both there. So, and that Krishna actually considers us learned if we know that. If we know that there's two knowers in each body, the individual soul and the Supreme Soul, and then we're actually in knowledge. So then he's talking about the field of activity, and he's saying that he's getting his knowledge from the Vedanta Sutra, which is another point, that although Krishna is omniscient, he doesn't really have to quote the Vedanta Sutra to back up his opinion, but he's making the point that he's, as somebody who is speaking in the spiritual science, he uses the authority of the Shastra to support what he's saying. And then it's describing in these verses 6 and 7 what constitute this field. This is the field that we, as knowers of the field, are aware of. So there's the 5 great elements. That's earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So we are knowing that. We are aware of this body, which is composed of these combinations of these 5 elements. And there's the false ego, which causes us to identify ourselves with the body. And there's intelligence. Intelligence is that discriminating part of the mind. The mind just accepts or rejects, but the intelligence evaluates something and tells the mind what to accept and what to reject, basically. And then in the enlightened person, the soul engages his intelligence to control his mind and senses. But in the materialistic consciousness, sometimes the force of the mind and senses, they overcome the intelligence, which Krishna talks about in Bhagavad Gita, and therefore one can lose one's spiritual focus. But in any case, we are the knower of the intelligence, and we can direct our intelligence. And we all have some intelligence, but it may not be very much. Krishna uses the word abudaya to describe the lack of intelligence of different classes of people in Bhagavad Gita. But it doesn't mean they don't have any intelligence, because that's just part of what the subtle body is made of. We have a gross body, which is made of the 5 elements, and the subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, and false ego. So the unmanifested, avyaktam. So generally, my impression is that the unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. So there's the material energy, and it differentiates into 3 qualities. And before that differentiation occurs, it's called pradhan, or the unmanifested. And these qualities are goodness, passion, and ignorance. And goodness is associated with maintenance, and ignorance is associated with destruction, and passion is associated with creation. And these 3 forces are always acting in this material world, and they're always vying for supremacy. Sometimes destruction comes out ahead, sometimes creation, sometimes maintenance. But before they become differentiated, their state is called the unmanifest, or the pradhan. So, back to the next one after the unmanifested is the 10 senses. So that means there's the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, which is the hearing and touch and sight and taste and smell in order of appearance. And then the 5 working senses, which is the speech, the hands, the legs, the genitals, and the rectum, basically. Those 5 active. Evacuation, generation, movement, moving with the hands, and speaking. So those are the 10 senses in the mind, which thinks and accepts and rejects. And then the 5 sense objects, that which is seen, that which is touched, like that. So we see form, and we smell aroma, we hear sound, like that. 5. In desire, hatred, happiness, distress. Now the aggregate is, I think that's one of the most mysterious ones out of all of them. I'm not sure if he actually says what the aggregate is anywhere. I don't think he describes what the aggregate is. So the idea is that these things are external to ourself, and one of the problems is that in our unself-realized state, we are identifying with the happiness and distress of the world, and different things that really have to do with our body and our subtle body and our gross body, and we're thinking that's us when we're actually beyond all that. Because the self-realized person actually realizes that he has nothing to do with the dualities of the body and the dualities of the mind. And there's just so many verses in the Bhagavad Gita about how the soul is beyond all the material dualities. I mean, it's just, and there's like dozens of verses like that. And that the person who's dear to Krishna is that person who's like equipoised in the face of all these heat, cold, happiness, distress, honor, dishonor. And is not disturbed because he's not trying to enjoy the material world. If we're trying to enjoy the material world, there's a difference between happiness and distress for us. One is valuable and one is not valuable. But if we're just trying to focus on doing something nicely for Krishna, both happiness or distress are things to be tolerated that can distract us from our service. So they're seen equally. They're both potential distractions from our meditation in Krishna, as opposed to one being superior and desirable and the other being. And therefore the devotee is neutral in all these circumstances. There's the most famous verse about that is when there's this king who says something jokingly toward Lord Shiva, but his wife doesn't really take it as a joke and curses Chitraketu to become a demon. So that's like, even if somebody cursed us to become a demon, we'd probably be a little bit upset about it, right? But he was so transcendental, he wasn't actually disturbed, and he accepted the curse. And because he was so highly elevated in devotional service, he remembered, even though that he had the body of a demon, that actually he was a devotee of Lord Narayan. And he continued to think of Lord Narayan in his mind and aspire to attain the kingdom of God. So that was Vritrasura. So when so basically after cursing him, Lord Shiva's wife is sort of amazed how undisturbed he is by being cursed. And so Shiva speaks this verse, Narayana prasave na kutasya vibhiti spargapavarga narkeshu api tulyarta darshanam, that those who are dear to Lord Narayan, they see heaven, they see liberation, and they see hell to be equal. So most people, if they're given a choice, you can go to heaven or you can go to hell or you can be liberated, people would have a definite idea of what they wanted to do, and it wouldn't be to go to hell. But it's just amazing. In one sense, I can see it in terms of like us doing the chanting of the holy name in public, right? Because sometimes we do go to places that are like hell, and we're not disturbed by the hellish place because we're basically fully engaged in trying to give the people who are hellishly engaged a superior spiritual experience. So we're not experiencing being in hell, although we are in what would be considered a hellish situation. A hellish situation would be basically everyone in the lowest mode of nature, the mode of ignorance, like when we chant at the bars and stuff. So, but because we're not really sort of in that situation, we just have a good time sharing Krishna with people. So whether we're sharing Krishna with people at the park or the bar, it's really all the same. And sometimes even the more degraded people, they actually appreciate the chanting more. We were chanting in Lewisham one time, a borough of London, and you notice that the butchers, they seem to really like the kirtan better than the other people. And I was thinking, well, that's sort of anomalous. These people are really degraded, then it occurred to me, well, because the chanting is so pure, it purifies people from their sinful reactions, and because they have the worst sinful reactions, they're feeling the most relief. So, so therefore, they're the most happy to encounter the kirtan party. So that was interesting. So we are actually beyond these material dualities, completely beyond them, and we can actually be situated in such a state of being completely transcendental by, as will be said at the end of chapter 14, by engaging in devotional service to Krishna and not falling down in any circumstance. We transcend the dualities of material nature and attain the spiritual plane. So one of the features of this section here, where we're dealing with this jnana yoga, is we're trying to understand in detail how we're not the body, and how these bodily transformations actually have nothing to do with us, and therefore so we can actually not to give up our interest in them, because everybody's interested in things that have something really to do with them, and then when we learn that these things are really external to us and didn't have anything to do with us, and we learn that we're actually part of Krishna, and then we have an eternal intimate relationship with Krishna, it's easier to focus more on recovering our eternal relationship with Krishna, which is something that's something which really is in our ultimate self-interest, rather than absorption in these things that actually have nothing to do with ourselves. So it's like we're trying to strive for. One of the differences that in Prabhupada's presentation of religion is he really focuses on that our service to Krishna isn't meant to get anything material. It's just to please Krishna, and that and if we actually understand that we're completely non-material and no material thing can ever satisfy us, then it's easy to approach Krishna in a mood of just serving him rather than trying to get something from Krishna. I was in a Harinam ashram in New York in December, and this Swami, Chandrasekhar Swami, was talking to us about approaching God for material things, and he was saying, God is God and Santa Claus is Santa Claus. Get them straight. God isn't somebody you approach with a list. God is the source of our very existence, who we have an eternal relationship with, one of 5 intimate rasas, and our soul is completely satisfied by giving our affection to Krishna in one way or another, and there's no material thing that can ever satisfy our soul. So the people who actually understand this intellectually, they don't approach God for some material thing, because they know it's not going to satisfy their soul, and whatever they need to exist in this world, God is supplying anyway, and He's even supplying it to the people who decry His existence, even the atheists, and even God's immortal enemies. He's still giving a place to stay and some food to eat. So basically, the people who are enlightened in spiritual knowledge know you don't have to approach God to get anything material. For one thing, whatever material thing you need to keep your body functioning so you can pursue self-realization, He's going to supply anyway. And anything beyond that isn't going to satisfy your soul. So therefore, there's this analysis of how we're different from all these different constituents of the field, so we can detach ourselves from our absorption in the field and be more excited about our learning about our identity as servants of Krishna and Krishna's qualities and activities and which are more relevant to our soul. And so is there any questions or comments, or should we go on to read verse 8 out of Do we have a time that we end? Should I go on and read verse 8 out of the...
Usually end a quarter past, so maybe end at 20 past. It just gives us time for that verse.
Okay. So the 8 through 12 are all together, but there's a lot of very important qualities in 8, which is amanitvam, adambitvam. So these are the items of knowledge. So that's another thing that Arjuna said, what is knowledge? So this is a whole list of items of knowledge. And it's actually good to break it up because there's so many of them. You couldn't possibly talk about them all in one class, you know. The purport Prabhupada has for them is like 4 pages. But the thing is, one of the most interesting things about this list of knowledge, items of knowledge, is the first one, pridelessness, humility and pridelessness are the first 2. Which is funny because like sometimes people are proud of their knowledge, right? But according to Krishna, if you're proud of your knowledge, then you're not actually in knowledge. Because if you're in knowledge, you wouldn't be proud. And then after that is non-violence. And sometimes it's explained that there's a relationship between that. If you're proud, then you're going to be violent. You know, for somebody who's humble is going to be concerned about causing violence to others, you know, where somebody who's proud, like take President Trump for example, he makes all kinds of plans without considering how much distress it's going to cause to others. That's interesting, you know. There's one Prabhupada disciple. He analyzed the economies in terms of the modes of nature, you know. And he said that capitalism is an economy affected by the mode of ignorance, you know, because one of the qualities of the mode of ignorance is that you don't consider the violence or distress caused to others by your actions, you know. And basically, in capitalism, you're just trying to increase your capital in how many people's lives that you ruin doing that doesn't really go into the equation, you know. So that was interesting. So basically, these 3 things are very important: that humility, pridelessness, and because of attaining those, one becomes non-violent. And Shantya is forgiveness usually, isn't it? Here, tolerance. Arjuna, simplicity, often also called honesty elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita. Then Acharya Pashmam, approaching a spiritual master. So that's one of the key items too. And you can see that you need to have the humility and the pridelessness before you're going to be doing that too. They're really roots of these other ones. Stharyam is steadiness, and Atma Vignigraha is self-control. Right? Yeah. So these are qualities of somebody who's spiritually advanced. And people, and these people who attain these qualities can actually realize the truth of the self, that the self is beyond the body. Whereas basically people who are proud, they're proud of having a particular certain material skill or something, but that's just something that comes with the body and will go with the body. It's like you can have 3 PhDs, but in your next life you have to start out going to kindergarten. You know? So it's time and death of the great leveler. Whatever we've amassed in terms of fame and wealth is taken away at the time of death, and we have to begin in the next life. So the self-realized soul he's not proud of having material assets because he realizes they're not substantial. Prahlad Maharaj is saying how worthless material things were because he witnessed his father who'd actually taken over the entire universe and had anything material that you could aspire for, how he lost it in a moment just by the mercy of Lord Nrsimhadev. And so what value of all these things? So humility has to do with not being proud of having these different material acquisitions. And if we have that, then have an opportunity to acquire spiritual acquisitions. Many of those qualities also are qualities of a Brahmana. Socham and Arjavam and Shanti are listed among the qualities of the Brahmana. And they're all qualities that support self-realization. Like this, the Atma, the Nigraha, self-control, there's a really nice part in the preface of the Nectar of Instruction, which deals with self-control. It's a really powerful point. I think they mentioned it when we studied the Bhakti Shastri. Try to look it up in my online Vedas. Because there's a lot of course, in the Nectar of Instruction, a lot of it is about self-control, controlling the tongue, belly, and genitals, the actions of anger, desire, etc. So, in all spiritual affairs, one's first duty is to control his mind and senses. Unless one controls his mind and senses, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Everyone with this material world is engrossed in the modes of passion and ignorance. One must promote himself to the platform of goodness, sattva guna, by following the instructions of Rupa Goswami, and then everything concerning how to make further progress will be revealed. So that's a very powerful point. And it makes sense because the mode of goodness is characterized by knowledge. And that if one takes the trouble to control his senses according to the advice of the previous saints and the revealed literature, then we'll actually come up to the mode of goodness, whereby what we actually need to do will be revealed within the heart, which would make our life a lot easier. If at every moment the best course of action appears to us in our heart, due to us being situated in the mode of goodness. So it's curious that it's so powerful. One must promote himself for the platform of goodness, sattva guna, by following the instructions of Rupa Goswami, and then everything concerning how to make further progress will be revealed. So it's encouraging us in this Atma Vinigraha, self-control, controlling our senses according to the Guru, according to the revealed literature, according to the saints, and coming up to a level where we get divine enlightenment from within. So I think I'll end here, which is 20 after. Said a few things about number 8 and leaving the other 4 verses of items of knowledge to the next speaker.
So it's funny the way Krishna answered the question in a kind of reverse order. At the very beginning. You don't know any the reasons or.
Sometimes they. Sometimes, if you look in that book by Burijan, sometimes he's collected some of those from. And then there's of course the commentaries of the other acharyas like Bayadev, Vidyabhushan, but I haven't heard in particular about why he focused on the field rather than Prakriti and Purusha. Of course, there's relationship between Prakriti and Purusha in the field, because really the Purusha is the knower of the field, and the Prakriti is the field's made out of Prakriti. But it's interesting that Arjuna considered them separate items. You know. And I think later on, Krishna will get into using those very words, Prakriti and Purusha. If you see, he talks about in 20, he starts talking about Prakriti and Purusha. 20, 21, 22. It's all about Prakriti and Purusha. So, anything else? Yeah.
Could you explain how you're saying that how to feed the soul? You're saying like the soul gains intelligence when you work less with the material.
Yeah, basically that there's different. The saints have given different recommendations for controlling the senses, and when we control the senses, that we come up to the mode of goodness, and then we become, which is a situation of enlightenment. So it like generally like Prabhupada gave some the people who were initiated. He gave 5 things to do to control the senses. One is to chant Hare Krishna, and then one is to give up 4 activities that really rivet your consciousness into the body, like intoxication, eating, illicit sex, and gambling, which sort of promote materialism in different ways. The animal has a right to live because it's a soul just like we do, so we're basically denying that spiritual truth when we eat meat. And illicit sex is really based on gratifying the senses of the body, so you can't really realize that you're not your body when you have an ambitious program for illicit sex. It's not really compatible. And also intoxication is produced out of the material energy. So sometimes people, they gain some insight in an altered state of consciousness that might move them in a spiritual direction. But if you're dependent on some kind of chemical elements to put you in a certain state, then that's just another part of the field of activity. It's not. It's just another part of the material world, the chemical elements that make up the drugs that put you in an altered state. So you're actually becoming more attached to the material world, or becoming more attached to the chemical elements that altered your consciousness. So, and then gambling is sort of a dishonest way of trying to get ahead. The standard way of getting ahead is to do your prescribed duty as an offering to God and depend on Him for whatever you need. That's how Krishna describes. Like sometimes people, they work some job that they hate just to get some money, just to get more money than they would to do a job that they actually were good at and they liked. So that has nothing to do with Bhagavad Gita. According to Bhagavad Gita, you should use your God-given talents and employ them in society and depend on God to maintain you. So trying to get ahead economically through gambling isn't Krishna's program for survival. Basically, there's different prescribed duties people have according to their own natures, and you just do your work and assume Krishna, because he's a nice guy, will take care of you. And you see that it's true. Yes. Yeah, intoxication, eating, illicit sex, and gambling, those things.
So, once a person is on the path of knowledge, would all these desires decrease or totally nullify?
Well, first of all, you understand intellectually how they're detrimental spiritually, So it'd be, so it makes sense to give them up. And then sometimes you also can experience practically how they're detrimental. Actually, that's the Srila Prabhupada says, he defined like true renunciation in one place as when you give up something because you can perceive it's an impediment to your spiritual life, you know. So like some people, they don't eat too much at night because they realize if you eat too much at night, you sleep too long and you don't have time to do your spiritual progress in the morning, or you're half asleep when you're doing it or something, so they eat less at night. So that's because they got some realization, you know. So people, you can actually experience how those different things, you know, negatively impact your spiritual life. But yeah, generally you understand by intellectually accepting it or seeing it intellectually how it doesn't work, and then by the practice you can feel practically how it's an impediment. There's different people I talk to people who become vegetarian in the course of time, and they get different realizations about how that's not, you know, a good thing, you know. You know, like actually, one girl I was talking to on the campus, I said that actually to become vegetarian is a simple way that you can move yourself in the direction of non-violence. You know, there's so many things that are beyond our control, but one thing that's in everyone's control is what they eat. You know? And she actually took it seriously, and she came. I saw her a few days later, and she said, "I became vegetarian because it made a lot of sense to me. It was the practical stuff I could take moving in a non-violent direction." And then she said that like at one point it was difficult to, you know, find something to eat, so she just she had chicken or something for dinner because it was at the dining hall, and she actually felt bad. It made her feel bad, like not, I think physically in addition to, you know, psychologically, you know. And she realized, yeah, this is not something I want, you know. So there's different.
It doesn't go away straight away, like you know, even if you intellectually, and even if you are on the path of practicing, desires can still hang around for a long time before they vanish.
Yeah, or they can go away temporarily and come back, or different things. Like our Guru Maharaj, he said that after hearing Srila Prabhupada once, he gave up illicit sex and intoxication, just hearing one. You know, Prabhupada was so pure, just hearing that one realized class. No, it doesn't. And so, you know, it is possible. And then some people are more or less addicted to things. Like for some people, it wasn't difficult to give up eating meat, whereas some people, it's a big challenge. You know, some people, you know, never really were attached to intoxication. You know, but other people, it's part of their whole lifestyle. You know, so everyone's differently situated. But the most important thing is that, if you add the chanting to your life, that you can get some internal spiritual satisfaction and come to appreciate that those other things aren't necessary or helpful. And there's one girl she was telling her how I came to Krishna consciousness story, and Radhanath Swami had like programs at a university there. I think it was a vegetarian cooking class, and the devotees would have, you know, be there, and they would have prasad, maybe they have a little kirtan or something. She liked going to the programs, but her whole program was every night she would go to the bar, and then she would go home, you know. And they offered to drive her home, and she said, "No, you just drop me downtown, it's all right." So she could go to the bar before she went home. But then after a while, she realized that going to the bar after the program sort of brought her down from the nice, you know, good feeling that she had from the program, so she just stopped going to the bar. You know? So it's like that, people. And this, you know, the Nantanataya who was here, he tells the story that he used to smoke, you know, and he was reading the books and he realized that it was incompatible smoking, and chanting. So he decided, well, I guess one of them will have to go, you know. So he would chant around, and then he would smoke a cigarette, and he would chant around. and as it so happened that the cigarettes went away, you know. But the most amazing thing for me is that he gained so much conviction that I have friends who chant like 6 hours a day in New York, you know. But it's you never run into people who chant much more than that. But he got me to chant 12 hours on the streets 3 times in Dublin. And he convinced a couple of my friends from Newcastle to fly over here to Dublin and chant for 24 hours in the streets. So he gained some conviction about the chanting from that, you know, from that experience, you know. He saw that it had a powerful transforming effect in his life. So he had some real faith in the reality. This is actually a really good thing. It can really benefit people. Let's share it, you know. So the thing is that all the spiritual things can be realized. They're all spiritual truths, and we can realize the power of the deity, the power of the holy name, the power of the Bhagavad Gita in our life. You know, if we practice it, we can see it's the potency of it. And if we have the desire, if we understand that those different materialistic things aren't good, even if we just have the desire to give them up, because Krishna fulfills the desires of all living entities, and especially he's more inclined to fulfill the desires of his devotees. So if we chant Hare Krishna with the desire to give them up, even if we're very much addicted to all of them, we ultimately we would be successful, because he would fulfill our desire to give them up. You know? So it's good to understand intellectually how they're detrimental spiritually, and to desire to give them up and to make some endeavor to give them up. But the most important thing is to add the chanting, because that can give you the power to give them up, and a higher taste to make you realize that you can be satisfied without them. So I guess we can end here. Thank you. It's so inspiring for me to see so many people at this class. I don't think I've ever seen this many people at this class before. So, is it in general getting a good crowd these days?
More than normal.
Oh yeah, that's nice. It's good every once in a while to have more than normal. I'm sorry we're going to places where there's fewer than normal. Very brave to come out on this one of the more miserable days this week, probably. It was a challenge to sing out there. You know, Sanjay and his family came by for like 20 minutes. Sanjay? Yeah, and his family. And the sign was coming off the table, and he had some tape in his bag, and he taped the sign back. Yeah, and he helped me carry the table from in front of Eason's to in the front of the post office, because it was raining, you know. So he played a key role, you know. And I said, even if everyone in the congregation came out for 20 minutes like you did, you know, then we'd have a dynamic going on, you know.
Oh yeah. Maybe we will make it tomorrow. Like send a message around.
Because it's going to be a lot warmer, and I think it's 5% chance of rain or something. It's going to be, yeah. It's going to be several degrees warmer, and the wind is also going down. Yeah. So it's all three are improving. Less rain, less wind, and less cold.
I'll be definitely more than 5 anyway.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you for your kind attention. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki! It's tough here with